Okay, I'm going to do puff pastry here. Here is the first step, my all-purpose flour, bread flour mixture, softened butter, and salt. Water's in the fridge chilled. I just got the flour out of the freezer, so it's pretty cold too. Now I'm going to put it in my mixer. Step 1. I've taken my cold water out of the fridge and added it to the mixing bowl. To the water I'm adding my cold flour mixture, which is a mixture of bread flour and AP flour. I'm going to mix this just long enough for the water to be incorporated by the flour, and then I will add the fat, in this case softened butter. Now all the other ingredients are cold, and I imagine that's why the butter is softened and brought to room temp, because it would probably be very difficult to mix cold butter with cold flour with cold water. Alright, fat's going in, mixing up quite nicely. And this thing needs to mix for only about 2 minutes. Oh, I almost forgot my salt. I probably waited a little too long to put the salt in, but it ends up getting properly incorporated, so no big deal. This is 1 minute into mixing. You can still see the salt kind of gathered at the bottom of the bowl. A couple of scrapings picked that up and it got mixed in quite nice. And this is about 2 or 3 minutes into mixing. It's just become a cohesive unit. You can still see butter chunks and things in there, but not very much. It's almost like a biscuit dough. And it's still very cold. And this is going to be put in the fridge overnight. Step 2 began on day 2. I probably could have did this step on day 1, but I decided for some reason to wait. I got my fat, which has been scaled out. Turned out to be pretty much 2 sticks of butter exactly. And I put it between plastic wrap and started rolling it out. The goal is to get it into one slab of about a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thickness. And then put that back in the fridge. Here's the slab. Parchment paper would probably work better than plastic wrap for this, unless it's a pretty good heavy gauge plastic wrap, because it tore on me a couple times. Ready? About 1/2 inch thick, and this will go back in the fridge to chill and be ready for incorporation into the détrempe, which brings us to step 3, covering the fat. Alrighty, here's my détrempe, which was cooled in the fridge overnight. It's a nice, cold, solid object. Slightly sticky to the touch, which is why a little bit of flour here on the work surface, my expansive work surface, to keep it from sticking. See, it wants to stick to my lightly floured rolling pin almost immediately. But the idea is to roll out the détrempe into a shape that can be folded in half around the slab of fat we made earlier, which again is unsalted butter. Alright, here it is rolled out. Unfortunately, not wide enough. Yeah, I went ahead and just made cuts and reformed it into the proper dimensions. There we go. To where it fits, and I can fold that over and wrap up the fat. However, the dough got a little warm while I was doing that, and so I put it back in the fridge. Yeah, see, it's a little stretchy. You don't want it to get too pliable when you're doing this, because you want the butter, which I broke right there. You want the butter and the dough to be the same consistency, because if the butter or the dough aren't the same consistency, they'll start to mix together instead of laminating. But I double time the speed for this so we can see me wrapping the butter in the trump. Here comes step 4. The instructions stated to press a rolling pin down into these ridges like this to incorporate, or not incorporate, but to get the butter and the flour into contact with each other. I mean, the butter and the dough in contact with each other so that they don't slip past one another when you're doing the folds. Alrighty, I may have gone a little too thin with it and indeed spread my butter apart and separated it, but I don't think I did. My main camera ran out of batteries, and so my wife picked up with her cell phone, hence the different aspect ratio. But this is me smoothing out the wrapped butter, the wrapped fat into trompe into doing the first turn, which I didn't get on video. Here it is after first turn. It's a business letter type fold is how it's described. And the idea is you chill that in the fridge and you roll it out again and you do another book fold or business letter fold, and that's called second turn. Here's it rolled out after the first turn, and I just fold up one end just like a business letter. There we go. And I fold up the other end, and that completes the second turn. Between turns, you put it back in the fridge at least an hour for it to chill thoroughly again. You don't ever want it to get warm because that butter will start melting and just mix with the dough and you've lost your lamination. In total, the recipe called for 5 turns, and this is it after the 5th. Looks pretty much the same, but if you were to cut a cross section, you would see the many layers that would develop, and it's a bunch. I tried doing the math in my head, and it's many layers. Alright, but that's pretty much the finished puff pastry, and you can use it to make many different things. I chose something simple, fruit turnovers. I rolled out my puff pastry into a big square, and cut off the scrap to make a nice, even rectangle. That was enough scrap to probably do half again as many turnovers as I ended up doing. Unfortunately, I never found time, and it went bad in the fridge. So, you just drop the fruit filling into the square that you've cut, and here's me pinching the edges. I don't know what got into me to make me think that I needed to pinch the edges, but I did, and as a result they came out pretty ugly. And there's the apple filling. The strawberry filling I made using frozen strawberries, and the recipe in the book for that used corn syrup and sugar for my strawberry mixture, and the apple mixture was right out of a can, like for apple pie. Alright, here's a few minutes into baking. They look like they're rising, but they're rising very unevenly, and that's no doubt due to the fact that I pinched off the edges. And here's my ugly first batch, but despite their ugly appearance, they were quite delicious. I used a simple sugar glaze drizzle. And here is probably the best example of the puff pastry laminated layers in the first batch. Not too bad. I mean, I pinched it off and so things got kind of jacked, but it's not too bad. My second batch, however, came out, I think, quite nicely. Alright, this time I realized my error in pinching off the sides, and so I just simply folded them over and gave them the egg wash. I'm letting them relax for about 15 minutes, waiting for the oven to come up to 400, and I'm cutting in the vent holes. There are the cut vent holes, just a simple snip of the scissors, and they're ready for baking. This is 10 minutes into the baking process. They seem to be rising really even compared to the previous batch. Some nice bubbly action there. Some of the fruit is erupting from the vent holes in the edges. And here are the turnovers fresh out of the oven. Those are pretty compared to my previous batch. You can see right there where my seam was, where I kind of did a repair job on the square I folded the apple turnovers out of, but they still rose evenly despite that. I brushed on my sugar glaze this time instead of drizzling it, and it gives them kind of a nice sweet shell of a sheen that looks kind of nice. And there's my sugar glaze, just powdered sugar and water. And here's my fancy plate with my turnovers arranged and a bite taken out of one of the strawberries for cross-sectional analysis. Delicious. And while I was up and baking, I decided to make soft yeast rolls for dinner that night. I didn't get any of the process on video, but here's the end result. I attempted all kinds of the 4-strand braid technique, the single knot, multiple knot technique, rounds, and pretzel knots. Well, thanks for watching. And no, I'm not Peter Coyote.